Hello and welcome. I want to talk to you today about support crew. And I found this picture and I think this just reflects us all actually. I think we all look good in red. And those of us who like fast cars or driving fast but don't have the opportunity to be in them, maybe we can be the one that actually gives them that shove off. But in my usual way of knowing, is this a Sarah something or is this a something for the church? It's been confirmed for me that it's for the church. Based on the welcome slides, and to a certain extent I could well be preaching to the choir, but there's also two sides to this, and I know I'm probably waffling, but it is going to come together, believe me. But a word was also said in the prayer thing this morning that hit some words within what I'm going to be saying. So, literally buckle up for the ride. I'll take this now. I want to talk to you about a couple of people, and I want us to keep in mind these initial people. They're probably names that many of us know, but also I want to be highlighting some other names to do with these people. This first guy, Charles Finney, he is well known for being an evangelist, a leader of the Second Awakening. He actually paved the way for Billy Graham and Dwight L. Moody as far as evangelism, and he did wild and wonderful things. And he would go into towns and do crusades and be there for days or weeks on end, and highly successful. The people that would come, they would flock, the numbers would increase every day, tents would be bursting, etc., etc. Fantastic. What I would like to also be keeping in mind is another guy called Daniel Nash. Now he's a name that not many people would be familiar, well, you wouldn't be as familiar with him because we never saw his face. He was there at the same time as Charles Finney, but it was never Daniel Nash that was up the front with, I was going to say the microphone, but he probably didn't have a microphone back in the day. But he is just as crucial to Charles Finney and the repercussions, that's probably the consequences that flow on. Daniel Nash, he has no schools named after him. He has no churches or denominations named after him. There are no movements named after him. There is nothing that he is really associated with that you could look up great articles and books about him. But 1775 to 1831, he's considered, it was written up as he had a lacklustre pastoral career. So he didn't really make it that far as a pastor in running his own church and doing sermons, etc., supposedly. But he was an incredibly strong main prayer warrior for Charles Finney. When Charles Finney felt, yep, I've got to be going into a particular place, Daniel Nash would go to that place 2 or 3 weeks ahead of those dates, and he would cruise around the township and he would find a couple of other people that he could pray with and hang out with, and he would pray with those people. He would pray and fast throughout those 2 or 3 weeks in preparation, and then while Charles Finney is in the tent preaching and evangelising and drawing the people in, Daniel Nash was with these other couple of people somewhere else, praying and fasting and praying. And so at one level, Daniel Nash never got to hear any of the messages. He never got to see how many people were coming in. He never got to see how many people were waiting outside the tents to come in. He didn't hear the comments about, wow, wasn't that fantastic, and I've been touched. He never got to see how many people would come to the front to see how many people were giving their lives to Christ. But he was praying and fasting to the extent that he would go in and maybe hire a room in one of these boarding houses, and if they didn't have a room, he would be in their attic or in their cellar. He would find somewhere to be. And it's been noted a couple of times that the people who were running those boarding houses would actually get quite concerned that they wouldn't see Daniel Nash come out. They wouldn't see him eating. But what they would hear is these really strange groanings and noises and at all hours of the day and the night. And when someone would open the door and have a little peek in to see what's happening, they would see Daniel on his hands and face just praying hard with his other couple of mates. Daniel Nash's prayers and intercessions and preparation before Charles Finney walked into that place was so crucial that when Daniel Nash died, Charles Finney's evangelistic streak stopped. He relied so heavily on Nash's prayers. Somebody else has described Daniel Nash as a nobody to the elite of his time. They would have found his humble man not worthy of a comment because he lived on a totally different plane. But you can be sure that he was known all too well in both heaven and hell. God's mighty men and women lay aside the distractions of life to do exploits in the spiritual realm. Whether or not they become famous is beside the point. This is how it is with all God's mighty men and women. They are famous in heaven. I think one of the many lessons we can take from Daniel Nash is, do we want to be known in heaven? And many people would say, yes, pick me, I want to get there. But I think a real test is if you're also known in hell, then that's because you are extremely important in heaven. It sounds a bit of a daunting thought, but I think it highlights the necessity and the importance of what Daniel Nash was doing, that his name was known in hell, but more so known in heaven. Another famous person, we've still, even though Billy Graham is died and his ministry still continues, he is a famous person. Lots of people would know his name, irrespective of whether you're a church attender or a Christian. You would have family members or friends who have been affected by his skills as an evangelist. He had a charismatic personality, known to be down-to-earth preaching, crusades of thousands all around the world. He mixed with presidents, royalty, high-ranking political officials. He sounds like he had it all. But the reason he was able to do that was because of at least two people I want to highlight today. And the first one is his wife. I want to be highlighting that we hear and we read of people who are famous or celebrities both within the Christian realm and outside, and the adulation that is given to them can be excessive. And my first thought is, yeah, that's great that they have, and it could well be, they've written a fantastic book, they've created a beautiful song, they are preaching so well. But one of my first thoughts is, who is behind them? Who is their support team? None of us are an island. Socially and emotionally, the world knows we can't be going as islands. We're not islands, and COVID highlighted that especially. But as Christians, we know we are made for community. Now, it could be with community of hundreds and thousands and we've got stacks of Facebook friends. All glory to you. But if you don't, we don't actually need numbers. It's do we actually have a support crew around us? Ruth Graham. She grew up in China amongst disease, despair, chaos of civil war. She was the daughter of missionary parents. She was a wife, she was a mother, she was a grandmother. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if you're a wife, a mother and a grandmother, and or a husband, a father and a grandfather, that itself is 3 jobs all in one. And is so incredibly important for the foundation of Christianity. Family, connection. Now, those of us who are not any of those, or the marriage is gone, etc., we all need community. We all need community. And we all have support teams, but we are all support crew for others, or we should be. Back to Ruth Graham. She taught Sunday school. So while Billy Graham's travelling around the world and rubbing shoulders with presidents and royalty and having happy snaps taken of him doing this, she's at home keeping the home fires burning. She's teaching Sunday school, she's baking and looking out in the community. But she also got established a Mission Children's Hospital, which is still going as of today. And that was actually in memory of her father, who was a doctor. And the intention of that hospital was for low-income and suffering families. Her father was not able to have this dream fulfilled, so she took it upon herself and did that. She actually desired to be a single missionary. She was happy to not be married. She was going to lay it all down for God and be a missionary. She was going to go by herself. That was not clearly God's plan for her. She was to be married. She was to have children. But she had 5 children, and she was considered Billy Graham's trusted friend, confidant, and supporter in sermon researching and writing. So while Billy Graham is up the front getting the accolades and the thousands are coming in and the handshakes are happening with these presidents and the royalty and people clamouring to see him, have him at special meals, etc., etc., she's actually the support crew, or one of his support crew. She's keeping the home fires burning so that he has the freedom to leave the house for days or weeks on end. She's also helping to do the running around, the researching, the thoughts and the ideas bouncing around for him to be able to present those amazing sermons. She actually has been known to be saying, or to have said at one point, that her cross to bear was the fact that for their marriage they had to be apart for long periods of time. She actually states that as her cross to bear. But she felt that that was needed and necessary and important. And when they did travel together, suddenly she's in the media spotlight, which apparently she felt incredibly uncomfortable with. Another member of Billy Graham's support crew is this bloke. He apparently was the founder and a director of a revival prayer fellowship. But while what's called the canvas cathedrals were happening, these tent evangelistic meetings with Billy Graham in there preaching, he was in a little tent, or it was considered a little tent. He was actually across the street praying day and night for the Billy Graham crusades. So a bit like Daniel Nash. He himself had been to a great revival in another place, in Bethlehem congregation in Oslo, and he returned to the USA to travel and preach. And as he's doing that, he actually came across a 30-year-old Billy Graham before he became well known, and invited him to have Billy Graham's first crusade under his guidance and leadership. That was Billy Graham's first crusade. And then he's off and running. So if Billy Graham didn't have this bloke giving him that opportunity and also praying for him, Billy Graham probably would not have, had that opportunity to just go off. Like pull the pin, throw the grenade in, and he's off and running. The support crew. I want to highlight the support crew for some of these people, because some of these people don't get acknowledged, and yet their names are known in heaven, but also they were known in hell. But they responded accordingly. Now these people, I guess Ruth, she would be praying, but she's also got to be attending to the children and the cooking and the baking and whatever. Daniel Nash and this guy were actually on their knees praying and having those intercessory prayer sessions while the crusades were happening. I want to highlight 3 people that were part of David's support crew. He actually had stacks and stacks and stacks. And I'm highlighting these 3 people. They are actually named in the Bible. But there would be a lot of people in the Bible who are just referred to his, ramshackle bunch of men. We don't know their names. But these are 3 people I want to highlight how far they went to support David. David is a man known to be after God's heart. And yet David actually intrigues me. He seems to have, started off young and he's killing lions and protecting his sheep, and then he kills Goliath, and then he goes on and he becomes king. and he has this difficulty in even being king to actually get there because of Saul, etc., etc. And then he's written all these beautiful songs and psalms and whatever. But who are some of his support crew? The first one I want to highlight is Jonathan. This is after a period of time when Saul is obviously getting cranky with David and getting stressed that he's an up-and-coming king, he's up-and-coming behind Saul. Saul's probably at the on the top of the pedestal, or what he thinks is, and he's trying to get rid of David. But at this point, David and Jonathan have actually formed a close friendship. They're probably about the same age, and David was within the kingdom as such, and playing the harp to calm Saul down, etc. But this is what it's reached, or highlights where Saul had reached. Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan. This is his own son. And he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman." It's not overly encouraging, a warm and fairy. "Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Now therefore send and bring him to me, for he will surely die." And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, "Why should he be killed? What has he done?" Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him. Again, not warm and furry. By which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. I think it's a fairly black and white message here. There's no doubting, well, golly, what did Saul really think of David? As well as, golly, what does Saul think of, what does my dad think of me? So Jonathan is in a balance where he's got this good mate who he knows his dad wants to kill, and yet there's this connection with his dad and his family. Prior to this conversation, there had also been a conversation between Jonathan and David. David was picking up quite quickly that Saul didn't like him, and Jonathan was, look, I'm sure you're not right. So they'd hatched this plan that Jonathan was going to go and speak to his dad, and based on the answer, with David hiding in a paddock or a field and where arrows would go, then that would signify what the result would be. So Jonathan, with heavy heart, after this conversation, then went out to the field with a boy and said, "I'm going to shoot some arrows, and if they land here, do this, and if they land there, go there and pick it all up." Meanwhile, David's out in that field and knows once those arrows have been shot and collected, and then the boy goes back into town, David and Jonathan have a really hard conversation. And I'm sure at that point there probably wasn't need for a lot of conversation, because they both knew with heavy hearts what Saul was intending to do with David if ever he got close enough. Ahimelech is another bloke who was part of David's support crew. Many of these people just may have appeared in David's life or in any of our lives momentarily, briefly, or for lengthened periods of time. But they are imperative. They are such an integral and important part of the path of each one of us. So if Jonathan was not there to pass these messages back to David, David could well have put himself in dangerous situations, and or Saul could have knocked him out. Now, I'm not saying it's purely at that human level, but God is working through Jonathan. And although Jonathan's name is, he never got to be king or have, everything that came with it, like his father did. He was prepared to lay it down on behalf of David, so David could actually step forward. Ahimelech. A little bit later, David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one is with you?" So David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has ordered me on some business and said to me, 'Do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you, or what I have commanded you.' And I have directed that's my typing, apologies. And I have directed me to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found." Verse 4 in this same chapter. And the priest answered David and said, "There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women." Verse 5 was, "Yes, they have," basically. Verse 6, "So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there, but the showbread which had been taken from the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away." So, just to override my lack of spelling there, or typing, it's typing, not my spelling. But David had come seeking food for him and his men, and his young men, and his team that was coming with him. The priest had nothing other than the holy bread. Ahimelech made the decision that he would use that bread to feed David and his young men. At that level, it seems great, wonderful, you've given him some food. But for Ahimelech, it was actually a big move. Also at that point, David then goes on and asks about warrior outfits, swords, and there was only a Goliath sword was there. That was handed to him. But, like all good stories, there was Doeg the Edomite happened to be present at that time. So he was there to listen to all this conversation. Moving into chapter 22. The previous verses before 11 was what I've written here is Saul. Saul was whining. He's whining about David to all the blokes around him, to his warriors. Why are you not supporting me? Everyone hates me. No one loves me. And having a go at his men. What are you doing? You're not protecting me. Why have you not killed this guy David? And he's whinging about all this. So that's when Doeg the Edomite then steps in and actually dobs him in. So the king has now heard where David was and what Ahimelech had done for David. So Saul doesn't then go chasing after David. He actually then targets Ahimelech. He sent a call to Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob. And they all came to the king, and Saul said, "Hear now, son of Ahitub." He answered, "Here I am, Lord." Then Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as it is the day?" So Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law who goes at your bidding and is honourable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all of this, little or much." Saul's response, not overly warm and furry yet again. And the king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." Then the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me." That's quite a hefty price for Ahimelech to pay. And not just Ahimelech, but lots of others. All the city of Nob with all their occupants and animals were slaughtered because of what Ahimelech had done to support David and David's men. It turned out that none of the servants that Saul was talking to, he said, "Can you now do this?" They actually said no. So it was Doeg the Edomite that did all the killing. The last person I just want to highlight with regard to David is Abigail. And this comes after David and his men again are hungry. And because they'd actually been out in the wild and sort of semi-protecting other people's fields and flocks as well as trying to avoid Saul, the setup was that if you then go to somebody and said, "Hey, can you feed us? We're hungry, we have no food," the expected response was they would say, yep, here's some food, because they were aware that David and his wild men as such were actually out there protecting the flocks while they're also running from Saul. So that's a bit of background. And Abigail, who was married to this guy called Nabal, and Nabal actually flipped and said, absolutely no way, who are you? You are just trash, you do nothing. And so this went back to David, and David's ready to, right, this is it, and pull out, all guns blazing. Godly guns back in the day, obviously. But he was just going to rip-roar in and slaughter everyone and everything. But one young man who isn't named, so one of the servants of Nabal and Abigail actually spoke to Abigail. He knew you don't go to Nabal and try and calm him, you go to Abigail. So if he hadn't spoken up. But Abigail's response was actually to try and calm the farm and gather food and drink and whatever and go out and actually meet up with David herself. She actually went against what her husband had actually said, so she had to go and do this secretively and quietly. And once she's down on her knees and apologising on behalf of her husband and like, here is food, I acknowledge, we all know, we love you, we acknowledge what you've been doing, so please don't destroy us all. And also in saying that, if you did, you're going to have blood on your hands, blood against your name. Don't let this, go that far. So Abigail's trying to calm the fires. David acknowledges that and says to Abigail, blessed is the Lord God of Israel who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal. Such a brave move, such a brave thing for a woman at that time with this crazy husband, but that's what she did. And she managed, again, to continue David on his straight and narrow path and not to stray left and right. Who are we? I guess there's two angles to this story, or two sides I would like us to be considering. And I don't know if you feel capable of doing both at once. But who has been your support crew? Who has been, and not just who, but it could be lots of people. Who have been the people who have been planting seeds in your life, and then it could be somebody different is coming along to water you. Somebody else is coming along to manicure so you're looking lovely. And then who else is coming along and putting on the pretty lights? So you're really just, stunning when the dust goes down, the sunset's looking wet. But also, who are you? Who or where are you planting seeds? Who or where are you watering? Who or where are you doing the manicuring? And who or where are you putting on the pretty lights? We talk about evangelism as, we've got to be out there, and different people have different ways, and it could be you stand on a street corner and you start spouting forth in a loud voice. It could be, at another side, you're just going about your business, and you just smiles here, conversation there, asking people about, how your day went, your week went, forming relationship. So that when you say, hey, what'd you do on the weekend? And they tell you what they did. And then when they say to you and you say, whatever, and I went to church. Oh, you go to church. Which church? What? And now it might be you get shut down because they don't want to know. But it might be a bit later they come back and say, hey, my life's going down. Tell me more about your church. It doesn't matter your evangelistic style. We all have to go with what is natural to us, but we all have to keep that in mind. Sharing the gospel. And we often complain, it would be lovely if I was able to approach someone or have someone at work and talk to them about that And then they come back and say, tell me more. And then I could tell them more. And then they say, hey, I'm coming to your church, or I'm going to a church, and I've now given my life to Christ. It would be lovely to see from go to woe. But I think for many of us, we don't get that opportunity, and we can lose heart. You know, I've been speaking to these people, I've been working beside them for a number of years, and they know what I do on Sunday. You know, when I walk into a room, they stop swearing, or they, shut down, they don't, whatever. They know, and I'm frustrated, and God, where are you? And it's easy to lose heart. But what I want to encourage you to do is that even when you do have that conversation with someone about, say, church or Jesus, it could well be somebody else has been planting the seeds. Somebody else has put a little bit of water on, and you're now getting the privilege and the honour of seeing some of those final steps. This is my last slide to challenge us all on who is your support team, but also who are you a support member for? And I just want to finish with, if I can wangle this on my phone, a reading from Romans 16, verses 1 to 2. This is Paul writing, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a deacon in the church in Centuria. Welcome her in the Lord as one who is worthy of honour among God's people. Help her in whatever she needs, for she has been helpful to many, and especially to me. Paul actually then goes on, and I won't read it all, but this is, it's something that's just hit me recently. The rest of the beginning of that chapter 16 is Paul actually giving thanks to a lot of people. And not wanting to go down a rabbit hole, but there's quite a few women in there too. That could be for a future sermon from me, and you can just, I won't give you a heads up because you might walk out before I even start. No, I need to work on that one. But I want to just acknowledge, that's just a little side issue, he acknowledges both men and women. But Paul himself actually starts off many letters thanking people for what they have done and doing for him. I want to finish with one story. Taken from that piece, help her in whatever she needs, for she's been helpful to many and especially to me. Captain Charlie Plum was a US Navy fighter pilot in Vietnam. After 75 combat missions, his plane was demolished by a surface-to-air missile. Plum ejected from the plane and parachuted into enemy hands. He spent the next 6 years in a communist prison. He survived the ordeal and now lectures on what he learned from his experience. One day, when he and his wife were sitting in a restaurant, a man from another table walked over and said, "You're Plum. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down." Plum said, "How in the world did you know that?" The man replied, "I packed your parachute." Then the man grabbed his hand and said, "I guess it worked." Plum assured him it had. "If your chute hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here today." That night he couldn't sleep, wondering about the man. What had he looked like in a Navy uniform? How many times had Plum seen him without even asking, "How are you?" or anything else? Because Plum was a fighter pilot and the other man was only a sailor. He pondered the many hours that sailor had spent in the bows of the ship, meticulously weaving the shrouds and folding the silks of each chute, holding in his hands the destiny of a stranger. As a result, when Plum gives a presentation, he routinely asks his audience an important question: who's packing your parachute? David, I'll ask for you to start coming up. Thank you very much. So maybe a better question there is not so much who's your support team, but who's packing your parachute? But also, whose parachute are you packing? God knows each one of us individually, personally. He knew us before we were even born. He knows our heart's desires. He knows our struggles. He knows our joys. He knows our difficulties. He knows our past. He knows our future. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a microphone, whether your face is plastered everywhere, whether you've written books, a book, written songs, done anything wild and wonderful. Unfortunately, I think the greatest moment that possibly it can come to awareness of how precious and special you are to those around you, which is ultimately the important thing. It doesn't really matter the people who hear the song or read the books at one level. Like, it's good if you can encourage them on. But if and when you turn up your toes, those people will still have your book, can listen to your music and remember you. But it's the people you see, you work with daily, your family, your friends, who are going to be the ones that miss you and will be devastated if and when you are actually to leave geographically, because you've got to move, and or to die. And I would say most of us don't have the opportunity of actually being in our own funeral, where we can hear all the lovely words that are said, and where the people will come up and talk about various times that touch them. This hit home to me at Corey's funeral, where one of the blokes who came up to say something was talking about his first meeting with Corey back 30-something years ago, and it happened to be as they're all on a plane and he's travelling with little ones, and it ended up that Corey gave up his seat for him to be in a larger seating environment because he had his little one with him. Corey graciously got up and moved somewhere else. And it just so happened they had the opportunity of crossing paths together at the Bible College. But at the time of that incident, they had no idea of it. But to me, that just highlighted the heart of Corey, which possibly some of us didn't have the privilege of seeing, or even hearing about, or knowing. And at one level, we don't need to. We don't need to actually hear about all these things. But Corey planted a seed at that point, and they actually had the opportunity of having that be watered and growing and kept up that friendship across the years. So I will now hand to Christos as we launch into a bit of ministry time. But I would like to leave you with that question of who is folding your parachute and whose parachute are you folding?